Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, searching for answers in the wake of Australia's worst mass shooting in 3 decades.
Their targets, the terrified members of Bondi's Jewish community, attending one of the most significant religious celebrations of the year, Hanukkah.
We'll talk to Al Jazeera's reporter on the scene about who was killed, who pulled the trigger, and where Australia goes from here. I'm Kevin Hirten, and this is The Take. Okay, before we continue with today's show, remember to leave us a comment telling us what you think about this episode and what stories you want us to do next. Or if you're on your favorite podcast app, please leave us a review telling us where you're listening from, and you might as well give us a 5-star rating while you're there. It really does help the show.
The danger really started to kick in when people started to scream and run and hide for cover. Everybody was getting notifications, everybody was looking at their phone, and we all got that similar vision all popping up on our phones of those 2 gunmen that we saw shooting people down at Bondi Beach. I'm Danielle Robertson. I am a journalist. I'm based here in Sydney, and I have been covering the Bondi shooting down at Bondi Beach for the last 48 hours.
Yes, it's been incredible coverage. I was watching the TV when you showed up on the scene, and you were barely ready. Like, they just turned a camera on you.
The investigation is being led by counter-terrorism teams as the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation gathers information on the shooters and how they coordinated this attack.
It must have been quite an experience just arriving at that chaos, huh?
Yeah, we did get down there very quickly. We were one of the first to arrive on the scene. In fact, we got quite close to the crime scene. We were right on the perimeter where police had put tape and blocked off the area that was a crime scene. Most people are thinking, no, this isn't real. This is, they were in disbelief. This is only something you see in America. And then it really started to kick in when people started getting phone calls and being asked if they're okay. And yeah, that's really when it felt real. And I went straight to the crime scene and the active scene.
Yeah, and you were across all of the details. You've been on this for 48 hours. So why don't we start with just some of the basics? Just before 7 p.m. on Sunday, December 14th, 2 gunmen opened fire during a celebration of the first day of Hanukkah at Sydney's very famous Bondi Beach. So what's the latest on who was killed, who the shooters were, and where the investigation is at this moment?
Yeah, I think it's important to note and to start with setting the scene because, of course, as you mentioned, this all happened at Bondi Beach. This is a place that is recognized globally. It is associated with a tranquil lifestyle, with sunbathers, with surfers. And this all occurred just before 7 p.m. in the evening on a Sunday, when the weather was mild, it was warm, and it was peak time for crowds to be in that area. People flocking down to Bondi Beach at that time to either watch the sunset, to go for a swim, or to take part in events as the year begins to wrap up. So at this time, there were thousands of people, not only on Bondi Beach, but in the area and in cafes surrounding it. And in a matter of minutes, that tranquil lifestyle really was cut through with the sounds of gunfire that rang out across the beach. And this is really not something that happens often in Australia. I spoke to a number of people who initially just thought, oh, it must be some sort of celebration.
We thought it was fireworks at the start. And then next second, we see people lying on the floor, so a kid gets shot. It was probably the worst feeling I've ever seen.
What we know is that 2 men left a vehicle in Bondi Beach. They were wearing black and they had big weapons, big long-range guns in their possession. They then walked over one of the footbridges in Bondi and they were up on an elevated footbridge and they started shooting towards crowds on the right-hand side, towards the ocean, towards the beach, towards that specific Jewish celebration that was taking place.
For people who don't know, Bondi Beach is not just a surfer's paradise or a surf hangout and a relaxed vibe. It's also has a sizable Jewish community, and they were holding a very large ceremony for the first day of Hanukkah. So put that into context for us. Give us a little bit more about the celebration that was happening for Hanukkah.
Yeah, that's right. Well, this specific celebration that was taking place on Bondi Beach is one that happens annually. It takes place outdoors, and they begin it by lighting the candle to begin that specific celebration. And in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, where Bondi Beach is located, it is a massive Jewish population. It is really aligned with the Jewish community here. There are a number of synagogues in this area. There are a number of cafes owned by, the Jewish community. And this is one of the largest Jewish communities presence is in Bondi Beach and the surrounding suburbs. So yeah, it's not unusual that this Hanukkah event was happening on Bondi Beach. As I said, it's regular. It happens every single year. When we arrived, there was a major police presence, major operation, lots of paramedics. There were police cars driving fast, really all around the road that connects to Bondi Beach, and everywhere was blocked off. It was quite hard to get to the area. Everywhere began to be cordoned off as they made that exclusion zone. No cars were allowed in or out, and people were being told to turn away. And we were able to walk in. We got just above one of the footbridges, just on the outskirts of that crime scene, and we were able to get above and have a view just over the crime scene there to get a glimpse of how big this operation was.
Danielle, why don't we talk about right now just like the latest on who was killed?
So of the victims, the ages really range from 10 years old to 87 years old. The youngest victim, her name is Matilda. She was down on Bondi Beach with her family celebrating this Jewish holiday when she was shot and killed. Another rabbi, he was a father of 5 and he was one of the organizers of the event. He was also killed. Alexander, he was an 87-year-old Holocaust survivor who died while he was shielding his wife. We've heard of another man we have here, Peter Marzo Meager. He was a former New South Wales police officer and a rugby volunteer. He was well known in the Bondi community. Many people saying that he was a big part of the community here. Another rabbi also among the deceased. You know, these stories really are just of people who were here during the summer holidays celebrating this pivotal Jewish, holiday. They were down there with their family trying to celebrate something special when this happened. All have their own stories, all have their own families that are now also going to be impacted by this and will now have to deal with being a part of this violent act that has now really hit the heart of all of these families and the community.
Today's incident is just an attack on humanity, it's an attack on the Jewish community. There's absolutely no need for anyone in this world to do the things that happened here.
The shooters have been identified as Naveed Akram, 24, and his 50-year-old father. Authorities have now searched their homes. What do we know about these two at this point, their motives, and how they had access to these weapons?
Yeah, that's right. So it is 50-year-old Sajid Akram and his son, who was a 24-year-old Naveed Akram. He is a bricklayer, the 24-year-old, and he had in fact come into police and authority attention in 2019. He was known to Australian intelligence services in a previous inquiry. He had been looked into in 2019, but he wasn't considered an immediate threat at that time. Again, now questions being raised over that. Now, his father, the 50-year-old, he was in fact killed in gunfire, multiple gunfire with police. So he died at the scene. And the 24-year-old son is now in a critical condition in hospital, no doubt under heavy police guard as they wait to question him and take him into custody. And their home was raided. Their home is located about 46 kilometres away from Bondi Beach, and authorities swarmed on their home trying to gather any evidence to try and piece together exactly how this unfolded. We also know that the father, he did in fact have a gun license and he did have permission to have the possession of at least 6 firearms. And that is now also being questioned. How these firearms were obtained, how they were stored, and of course, how they were eventually used. That gun laws now being, scrutinized and looked at, and the Prime Minister saying that he will, in fact, now maybe looking into how legislation could potentially be changed.
There was a lot of reporting sort of in the fog of all of this, especially once we got an official designation that this was being called terrorism. People were talking about improvised explosive devices. Did any of that pan out?
Yeah, so when we were reporting live from the scene, and as the investigation continued and it became no longer an emergency situation, there was still a period of time, about 1 or 2 hours, where it was still quite dangerous because police were sending out alerts saying that while the 2 suspects have been contained, they are no longer a threat to the public. There are concerns that there are explosives dotted all around Bondi Beach. Some of them, they said, were in vehicles, and they thought that some may have been under footbridges. Now, police did, in fact, find an explosive in one of the vehicles, and I understand they found 2, and they were able to contain that and take that away from the area. But there was an hour or 2 that was quite tense, quite a sensitive moment where police were scouring all the vehicles in the area, methodically looking through every single vehicle with torches to make sure that there were no explosives in there. And they were able to find some, contain them, and take them away. And that was quite close to where we were.
I've got to ask you about this man who helped disarm the gunman.
Oh! C'est un malade! Oh mon gros!
He's now famous, Ahmed Al-Ahmed. And this video has been seen all over the world. Everyone's seen it at this point. What do we know about this man?
Yeah, well, Ahmed Al-Ahmed has now been classified as an Australian hero. The vision of him putting his life at risk to save others has now gone viral, with, leaders around the world also saying that they have seen this. He is, in fact, a fruit shop owner here in Sydney, and he did suffer some gunshot wounds. But to paint you a picture of what that vision saw, what we know is he was hiding behind a vehicle, just to start with, before he then leaped towards the gunman. He grabbed him from behind, wrapped his arms around him, and then there was this very frightening few seconds of a tussle that could have potentially been fatal, and he was able to wrestle and grapple and get that gun off the shooter. He then stood back, held the gun and pointed it towards the shooter, but he in fact did not fire. He then put it down and ran to safety himself. Now, this has now, gone viral around Australia and as well as around the world. And this is now standing really as a testament to how heroic Australians have been and how brave they have been in the face of this extreme danger. The US President Donald Trump even saying that he had seen that video and he praised the work of Ahmed Al-Ahmed at that time. Of course, it came at a price. He has suffered from bullet wounds and he's in hospital at the moment recovering.
More with Danielle after the break. So Australia has famously tough gun laws. These were put into place after another mass shooting back in 1996.
At least 34 people were killed and 4 others critically wounded when a 29-year-old gunman with a history of mental problems opened fire in a popular tourist area.
Can you give us a bit of backstory, try to put into words just how jarring a mass shooting will be to Australians who have worked so hard to avoid this?
Yeah, so we have some of the strictest gun laws in the world. Of course, they came into place in 1996 after the Port Arthur massacre, which means it's very difficult for people to own a firearm. So now there are questions being raised on, in fact, is our legislation working? How was this perpetrator able to obtain a gun license and as well have the ability to have possession of up to 6 guns, in fact, and how that was not monitored. The Prime Minister, again, reiterating that, of course, those big gun reforms came in 1996, but he hasn't ruled out changing them again and bringing in even harsher restrictions. When they came in 1996, those gun laws, it did work. There is evidence and facts that the number of shootings in fact went down. In fact, this is the biggest mass shooting we have seen since the Port Arthur massacre in 1996. So it does work, and the Prime Minister hasn't ruled out making that even tougher.
Yeah, Australians are proud of those gun laws. I have to say, as an American, it was almost jarring to see the Prime Minister immediately identify the problem, which is the gun laws.
The government is prepared to take whatever action is necessary. Included in that is the need for tougher gun laws. And this afternoon at 4 o'clock, I will put on the agenda of the National Cabinet.
I think the Premier of New South Wales said something similar, didn't he?
Yeah, that's right. We do not need to have assault rifles in your possession. It is not necessary for people to walk around in New South Wales, in Sydney, with an assault rifle. So if something needs to be done to prevent people from having that in possession, the authorities here aren't afraid to put that in place. It's a very different mindset that we have here. It's not something that we see every day, people having guns. It's very rare. Most people here in Australia that I know of have never even seen a gun or held a gun, let alone shoot a gun.
Wow.
In fact, even Ahmed al-Ahmed, he had absolutely no firearm training. He had absolutely no training in that department at all. Many people saying, why didn't he shoot the gun at the perpetrator? We don't know for sure why he did or why not, but we do know that he has absolutely no training. He may not have even known how to handle that gun.
The reactions to the shooting have been coming in from all over the world and domestically, of course. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said it was pure evil. And Israeli President Isaac Herzog called it cruel and then expressed his heartfelt sympathy for the victims.
Our heart goes out to them. Our heart misses a beat. The entire nation of Israel misses a beat in this very moment.
But very quickly, the messages got political.
We send our warmest strength from here, from Jerusalem, and we repeat our alert time and again to the Australian government to seek action and fight against the enormous wave of anti-Semitism which is plaguing Australian society.
Let me try to characterize. I think the Australian government is coming under pressure on two fronts. One is gun control, which we already addressed, and the other is whether or not it's doing enough to address anti-Semitism. What has the government done to address anti-Semitism over the past 2 years? It is pretty substantial.
Yeah, that's right. There are reports that anti-Semitism has been on the rise, in particular over the last 2 years, but this has been an issue that has been ongoing over decades. One of those things that they have implemented was Operation Shelter, and that was put into place in 2023, and that was sort of in reaction to the pro-Palestinian protests that were taking place during the last couple of years. Another one is that we have the anti-Semitism envoy here in Australia, and they really supposed to work with the government to discuss what policies, what processes can be put in place specifically to protect the Jewish community here in Australia from anti-Semitic attacks. Ones that have been on the rise over the last couple of years, mostly in the last couple of years confined to things like graffiti and vandalizing things like synagogues. Nothing of this scale. And of course, now there is criticism that, the government has not listened to the envoy. They have not listened to what they have said should be put in place. Of course, the anti-Semitism envoy also releasing a list of recommendations that the government should put in place, highlighting to the government that, there is an increase of attacks. This is what you should do. That has not yet been implemented. And of course, the government is now being criticized for that.
And the state of Israel was furious with the Australians earlier this year when they recognized a Palestinian state. And Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, was explicit. He's saying that Australia's support for this Palestinian state, quote, pours fuel on the anti-Semitic fire. And meanwhile, on the other side, it's just the opposite, that in fact, it's the actions of Israel, the war on Gaza, that puts Jews at risk. And this shooting is the latest example of it. So, the rhetoric continues. Everyone goes back to their corners. And meanwhile, it's ordinary worshipers who are caught in the middle here, and they're paying the ultimate price. So, Danielle, I think there'll be plenty of time for policy and implications, and these conversations will continue. But I wonder if we could finish more with some of the lives lost, something from your reporting that you'll never forget.
Yeah, well, one of the youngest victims of this shooting here in Bondi was a 10-year-old girl called Matilda, and her family have described her, they said, as a very sweet, happy child with a beautiful smile who always gives her family cuddles. And she was down on the beach enjoying this Jewish celebration with her family when these gunmen came and targeted this event. A lot of the people that we also spoke to who had arrived at vigils today, who wanted to lay flowers in memory of those who have lost their lives and write messages for people who have lost family members. Some of the people we spoke to, they said that they are in shock and they are angry, but one thing that won't be taken away from them is their resilience. People saying that they will not let this break them and will not let this define them. Many people saying that this is a time for Australia to unite and for people to come together and not divide.
Danielle, thank you for your reporting, and thank you for coming on The Take today.
Thank you.